What if the greatest threat to a billion-dollar empire wasn't a ruthless competitor, but one forgotten promise made to a little girl on a freezing night? 20 years of hard work, thousands of employees, a company worth nearly $1 billion. All of it was about to disappear. The headlines already called him a thief. His own board had turned against him. The courtroom was only minutes away from taking everything he had built. But no one, not the judge, not the lawyers, not even Ethan Brooks himself, expected the next person to walk through those courtroom doors. Because 15 years earlier, she had been nothing more than a homeless little girl sleeping on a park bench with nowhere left to go. 15 years earlier, Chicago was drowning beneath one of the worst autumn storms the city had seen in years. Rain hammered against the sidewalks. The wind pushed through the empty streets with enough force to knock over trash cans and send newspapers flying into the darkness. Most people hurried home. One man didn't. 33-year-old Ethan Brooks had just finished another 14-hour shift repairing construction equipment on the south side of the city. His hands were stained with grease that never seemed to wash away. His back ached. His boots leaked whenever it rained. And every dollar he earned already had somewhere to go. Rent, food, school supplies, medicine. Since losing his wife 3 years earlier, Ethan had been raising his 8-year-old son, Noah, completely alone. Life had taught him to count every penny. Still, there was one thing he refused to count: kindness. As Ethan crossed Lincoln Park on his way to the train station, something caught his attention beneath an old gazebo near the frozen fountain. A child, she couldn't have been older than 9. She sat curled against one of the wooden benches, hugging an old backpack that looked almost empty. Her sneakers were soaked. Her hoodie was several sizes too big. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She simply stared at the rain as though she'd already accepted that nobody was coming. Hundreds of people had passed her that evening. Not one had stopped. Ethan did. He stayed several feet away, careful not to frighten her. "You hungry?" he asked gently. The little girl looked at him with cautious blue eyes. Instead of answering, she asked, "Are you with Child Services?" Ethan blinked. "No." Her shoulders relaxed just a little. "My name's Ethan." Silence finally. "I'm Ava." Nothing more, no last name. No explanation, just Ava. Ethan didn't ask questions. Instead, he walked across the street to a small diner that was about to close. 5 minutes later, he returned carrying hot chicken soup, fresh bread, and a thick winter blanket the owner insisted he take without charging him. He placed everything beside her. "You don't have to trust me," he said, "but you don't have to stay cold either." For almost a minute, she didn't touch the food. Children who had been disappointed enough learned that kindness often came with a price. Then, slowly, she picked up the bowl with both trembling hands. Steam rose into the cold air. She took one careful sip. It was probably the first hot meal she'd eaten in days. While she ate, Ethan quietly called the police and Child Protective Services. Everything had to be done legally. He wasn't about to make a frightened child even more vulnerable. When the social worker arrived 40 minutes later, the truth came out. No missing persons report, no relatives, no emergency contacts. Her mother had died months earlier. Her father had disappeared long before that. For weeks she'd been drifting between shelters until eventually there was nowhere left to go. The social worker sighed. "The system's overloaded." Those 4 words hit Ethan harder than they should have. Overloaded. As if this little girl were just another file waiting to be stacked on a shelf. Before leaving, Ava looked at Ethan. Not with hope. Hope had already been taken from her. She simply asked the question every abandoned child secretly carries inside. "If I leave, will anybody remember me?" Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. He thought about Noah waiting at home. He remembered the promise he'd made beside his wife's hospital bed, that no child under his roof would ever feel abandoned. He looked back at Ava, then at the exhausted social worker, and quietly said something that would change every life in that park forever. "I don't know what tomorrow looks like, but tonight," She doesn't sleep alone. The next morning, Ethan Brooks walked into the offices of Child Protective Services with a lunchbox in one hand and 9-year-old Ava quietly following beside him. Every person in the waiting room assumed he was dropping her off. Instead, he asked for adoption paperwork. The caseworker looked up in surprise. "You understand what you're asking," she said. "You're a single father with one child already. Your income barely meets the minimum requirement." "I understand," Ethan replied. "It could take months." "I'll wait. There are no guarantees." "I know." She studied him for a long moment before asking the question everyone else had been thinking. "Why would you do this for a child you've known less than 24 hours?" Ethan smiled softly. "Because yesterday, every person who walked past her expected someone else to stop. I decided that someone should be me." The adoption process lasted nearly 8 months. There were home inspections, financial interviews, background investigations, psychological evaluations, more paperwork than Ethan thought existed in the entire state of Illinois. More than once, friends told him to give up. Even some family members questioned his decision. "You can barely support Noah. What happens if you lose your job? You don't even know this girl's past." Ethan answered every doubt the same way. "I know enough." The day the adoption became official was strangely ordinary. No television cameras, no applause, no celebration. Just a quiet courtroom with an aging family judge and a few signatures. When everything was finished, the judge smiled warmly. "Congratulations. Ava Carter is now legally Ava Brooks." For the first time since Ethan had met her, the little girl smiled without fear. That evening, Ethan handed Ava a small brass key attached to a faded blue keychain. "This is yours." She looked confused. "What does it open?" "Our front door." "But what if I lose it?" "You'll get another." "What if I break something?" "We'll fix it." "What if I make a mistake?" Ethan knelt beside her. Then he said words that Ava would carry inside her heart for the next 15 years. "As long as this key belongs to you, so does this home. No matter what happens." Life wasn't magically easier. If anything, it became harder. Money was constantly short. The apartment was tiny. Sometimes Ethan skipped dinner so Noah and Ava wouldn't have to. During harsh Chicago winters, he wore old boots with holes because buying new ones meant delaying school supplies. Neither child realized how many sacrifices he quietly made, and Ethan preferred it that way. Children should carry dreams, not burdens. Years passed. Noah and Ava became inseparable. They argued over television shows, competed over homework, shared birthdays, protected each other from school bullies. Until eventually, no one remembered they weren't brother and sister by blood. To Noah, she simply was his sister. Meanwhile, Ethan noticed something during his years repairing heavy construction equipment. The biggest infrastructure companies in America weren't losing billions because of broken machines. They were losing billions because of terrible planning. Construction crews waited days for missing materials. Steel shipments arrived too early. Concrete arrived too late. Equipment sat unused while entire projects fell behind schedule. Nobody connected the pieces. Everyone blamed someone else. But Ethan had spent nearly 2 decades working beside mechanics, truck drivers, crane operators, warehouse managers. He understood every weak link because he'd lived inside them. One evening, sitting at the tiny kitchen table after the children had gone to bed, he sketched an idea on the back of an old grocery receipt. A company that wouldn't build skyscrapers. It would make sure skyscrapers never stopped being built. Smart logistics, real-time delivery tracking, predictive scheduling, equipment coordination, construction supply management, simple ideas. Nobody else was doing them. He borrowed against everything he owned, bought one used delivery truck, rented an abandoned warehouse, painted the company name himself across the side of the truck. Brooks Infrastructure Logistics. Its first office contained one folding table, 2 metal chairs, a second-hand computer that froze every 15 minutes, and one man willing to work 18 hours a day. Noah helped after school by entering delivery orders. Ava organized invoices with color-coded folders she designed herself. At 13 years old, she was already reading contracts just to understand how businesses actually worked. One night she asked Ethan something unusual. "Why are contracts always so complicated?" He smiled. "So people stop reading." She frowned. "That's unfair." "It is. So how do ordinary people protect themselves?" Ethan slid a thick contract across the table. "You read every single word." He tapped the final page. The most dangerous sentence is usually the one nobody bothers reading. Ava never forgot it. Years later, while most teenagers dreamed about becoming influencers, athletes, or celebrities, she made an unexpected decision. "I want to become a lawyer." Not because she loved courtrooms, because she hated watching honest people lose simply because they couldn't understand complicated paperwork. Ethan looked at her proudly, then quietly looked at the tuition costs. Harvard Law, impossible, at least it should have been. Possible, at least it should have been. The acceptance letter from Harvard Law School arrived on an ordinary Tuesday. Ava ran all the way from the mailbox before Ethan even finished parking his truck. Her hands shook as she opened the envelope. For several seconds, she couldn't speak. Only tears filled her eyes. "Finally, I got in." Ethan smiled so proudly that Noah thought his father might burst. The three of them celebrated that night with cheap pizza and supermarket cake. It wasn't much, but to them, it felt like the richest dinner in Chicago. Later that evening, after Noah and Ava had gone to bed, Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table with the tuition estimate. His smile slowly disappeared. The first year's expenses alone were more money than he'd earned in several years repairing heavy equipment. He quietly folded the paper, then walked outside. The next morning, his oldest delivery truck disappeared from the company yard. Not because it had broken down, because Ethan had sold it. It was the first truck Brooks Infrastructure had ever owned. The truck that had built the business. The truck Ethan refused to sell even when collectors had come calling years earlier. But now, a dream mattered more than a memory. When Ava found out, she was devastated. "You sold your first truck." Ethan nodded. "It was just a truck." "It wasn't just a truck. It built this company." He smiled gently. "No. It helped build it. You are going to help protect it." Those words stayed with Ava every day she spent studying law. The years moved quickly. Brooks Infrastructure Logistics became one of the fastest-growing infrastructure support companies in America. Then came government bridge projects, airport expansions, railway modernization, national highway contracts. One project became 10 became hundreds within 15 years. Brooks Infrastructure Group operated across 23 states. Over 18,000 employees depended on the company. Financial analysts valued it at nearly $1 billion. Business magazines called Ethan Brooks the billionaire who still wore steel-toe boots. But Ethan ignored the headlines. Every Friday morning, he still walked through the equipment yard shaking hands with mechanics before entering the executive offices. He remembered every employee's first name. He attended retirement parties. He visited injured workers in hospitals. To Wall Street, that seemed old-fashioned. To his employees, it made him family. Success, however, always attracts people who believe they deserve what someone else built. One of them was Richard Ashcroft, the company's chief financial officer. Perfect suits, perfect smile, perfect reputation. He had degrees from the finest business schools. He spoke in numbers instead of names. To him, people were assets, families were liabilities. Loyalty had no place inside a balance sheet. Ashcroft had spent years earning Ethan's trust. But behind closed doors, he had been building something else, an alliance, across town. At the headquarters of Sterling Capital Partners, billionaire investor Victoria Langford watched Brooks Infrastructure with growing interest. She wasn't interested in running the company. She wanted to own it, then dismantle it, sell its assets, lay off thousands, triple her investment within 2 years. The only obstacle was Ethan Brooks, as founder. He still controlled enough voting shares to block any hostile takeover, unless someone first destroyed his reputation. One rainy evening, Ashcroft entered Victoria Langford's private office. She poured 2 glasses of expensive whiskey. Neither touched theirs. "What do you need?" she asked. Ashcroft smiled. "One courtroom. And one believable lie." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." Ashcroft slid a folder across the desk. Inside were copies of old company trust agreements, financial records, board resolutions, and one name highlighted in yellow, Ava Brooks. Victoria looked up. The adopted daughter. Ashcroft nodded. "People forgive financial mistakes. They don't forgive emotional ones. If the public believes Ethan secretly used company money to enrich the homeless girl he adopted, his image disappears overnight." Victoria slowly smiled. "Turn kindness into corruption." Ashcroft lifted his glass. "Exactly." The conspiracy unfolded with terrifying precision. Fake accounting trails, forged authorizations, edited board minutes, old signatures digitally copied onto newly created documents. Every piece looked authentic. Every lie supported another. Within 3 weeks, anonymous tips reached financial reporters, then regulators, then shareholders. The first headline exploded across national news. Billionaire founder, accused of hiding company, millions in secret family trust. Within hours, television stations replayed the story, stock prices dropped, investors panicked, employees whispered in break rooms. Social media reached its own verdict long before any judge ever could. The comments hurt the most. "Guess kindness was just marketing. Another fake billionaire pretending to care. Never trust people who act humble." Ethan stared silently at the television in his office. He didn't defend himself, didn't shout, didn't blame anyone. He simply turned the television off. Noah stormed into the room moments later. "They're destroying you. They're lying. We need to fight back now." Ethan rested a calm hand on his son's shoulder. "If we fight anger with anger, we lose twice." Noah clenched his fists. "But they're winning. For now." Ethan quietly looked out the office window toward the company yard. Hundreds of workers continued loading trucks, completely unaware that the future of every paycheck they depended on had just become uncertain. That evening, Ava received a phone call in Washington, D.C., where she had become one of the country's youngest attorneys specializing in corporate fraud investigations. She answered immediately. Noah's voice cracked before he could finish the sentence. "They're coming after Dad." Without another word, Ava opened her laptop. She read every accusation, every financial record, every forged document, every fabricated signature. She didn't panic. She noticed something else. One document, one tiny detail, didn't belong. Someone had made one mistake, a mistake so small that almost nobody would ever notice it. But Ava did. She whispered to herself. "You read every single word." Exactly as Ethan had taught her 15 years earlier. She closed the laptop, picked up her coat, then disappeared. By the next morning, her apartment was empty. Her phone was switched off. Her law firm had no idea where she'd gone. Even Noah couldn't reach her. Days passed. Nothing. The media noticed. Then the board noticed. Finally, Richard Ashcroft smiled. "Perfect. The one person who could save Ethan Brooks has vanished." 3 days later, Federal District Court, Chicago. Every seat inside the courtroom was filled. Business reporters lined the back wall. National media waited outside the courthouse. Employees from Brooks Infrastructure watched the live broadcast from break rooms across 23 states. For millions of people, this was another billionaire corruption trial. For Ethan Brooks, it was the day everything he had spent 15 years building could disappear forever. Ethan walked into the courtroom wearing the same navy blue suit he had worn to Noah's college graduation. It wasn't expensive. The sleeves had been altered twice. The shoes had visible scratches. Yet he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who knew his character wasn't stitched into his clothes. Noah walked beside him. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. Across the aisle, Richard Ashcroft looked completely relaxed. Victoria Langford whispered something to her attorneys before smiling toward the cameras. Everything was unfolding exactly as they had planned, or so they believed. Judge Eleanor Hayes entered. The courtroom stood. After the formalities, the lead prosecutor began presenting the case. Charts appeared on large screens. Financial transfers, corporate trust accounts, digital copies of Ethan's signature. Every document pointed toward the same conclusion: that Ethan Brooks had secretly diverted company assets into a trust controlled by his adopted daughter. The presentation lasted almost 2 hours. When it ended, the courtroom had grown quiet. Even neutral observers struggled to see a way out. Judge Hayes turned toward the defense. "Mr. Brooks, do you dispute creating these trust documents?" Ethan answered honestly, "I created a trust." A wave of whispers spread through the gallery. The judge continued, "And does that trust bear the name of Ava Brooks?" "It does." More whispers. Television reporters immediately sent breaking news alerts. Founder admits creating secret trust. Richard Ashcroft leaned back in satisfaction. Exactly the headline he wanted. Ethan's temporary attorney stood. "Your Honor, the trust itself isn't illegal, but without the original founding documents, we cannot fully explain its purpose today." Judge Hayes lowered her glasses. "Do you possess those documents?" Silence. The attorney slowly lowered his head. "No, Your Honor." Noah felt his stomach sink. Richard Ashcroft looked toward Victoria Langford. She gave him the smallest nod. Victory was seconds away. Judge Hayes reached for her pen. "The court is prepared to issue a temporary suspension of Mr. Brooks, voting authority pending." The courtroom doors opened. Every head turned. A young woman wearing a charcoal gray suit stepped inside carrying an old leather document case. She didn't rush. She didn't apologize. She simply walked toward the defense table with calm, measured confidence. 15 years earlier, she had entered Ethan's home carrying nothing but a torn backpack. Today, she carried something infinitely more valuable, the truth. Noah stood first. "Ava." Ethan slowly turned. For a brief moment, he didn't see the brilliant attorney standing before him. He saw a frightened little girl sitting alone beneath freezing rain. The same child who had once asked whether anyone would ever come back for her. This time, she had. She faced the judge. "Ava Brooks, counsel for the defense. I respectfully request permission to submit newly discovered evidence." The courtroom fell silent. Judge Hayes studied her carefully. "Ms. Brooks, you've been missing for 3 days. I've been investigating." Richard Ashcroft immediately stood. "Objection. This witness has a direct personal interest in the outcome." Ava turned toward him. "So do you." The courtroom became perfectly still. Without raising her voice, she continued, "You accuse my father of creating a fraudulent trust in my name. Then I'm the only person qualified to explain why that trust exists." Judge Hayes nodded. "Proceed." Ava carefully placed a weathered folder onto the evidence table. Its edges were worn with age. Across the front, in Ethan's handwriting, were 7 simple words: "Original Founders Protection Charter." Ethan's eyes widened. He hadn't seen that folder in over 15 years. He thought it had been destroyed. Ava opened the first page. This document was signed 4 years before Brooks Infrastructure became a public corporation. It establishes a Founders Protection Charter. She looked directly at the judge. "My father never transferred company assets into my personal ownership. He transferred legal authority to protect the company from anyone attempting a fraudulent takeover." She paused. "The trust doesn't make me wealthy. It makes me responsible." The courtroom buzzed with confusion. Judge Hayes leaned forward. "Explain." Ava walked toward the display screen. The plaintiffs intentionally removed Section 9. She displayed the complete version. Everyone watched in silence. Section 9 read, "If the founder is ever falsely accused through fabricated financial evidence designed to force surrender of controlling shares, temporary voting authority shall immediately transfer to the independent protector named within this charter until the investigation concludes." Judge Hayes slowly looked up. "And who is the independent protector?" Ava met her eyes. "I am." The room exploded with whispers. Richard Ashcroft's confident smile disappeared for the first time. Victoria Langford gripped the edge of the table. "No," she whispered, "that's impossible." Ava wasn't finished. She placed another folder onto the evidence table. "I also obtained something else." Judge Hayes looked curious. "What is it?" "The original server backup." Richard Ashcroft's face drained of color. Ava continued. "The financial records submitted by the plaintiffs were edited." She displayed two timelines side by side, one authentic, one altered. Every fabricated transaction had been inserted weeks later. Then, she revealed the digital audit trail, every alteration traced back to a single executive login, Richard Ashcroft. The courtroom froze. Reporters stopped typing. Even the judge stared silently at the screen. Richard swallowed hard. His attorney slowly closed his notebook. For the first time, he knew they were no longer defending a lawsuit. They were defending a conspiracy. They were defending a conspiracy. The silence inside the courtroom felt heavier than any argument. For nearly 10 seconds, no one spoke. Richard Ashcroft stared at the screen as if the evidence might somehow disappear if he looked long enough. It didn't. Judge Eleanor Hayes slowly adjusted her glasses before turning toward the court clerk. "Mark every digital record submitted by the defense as admitted into evidence." The clerk nodded. "Admitted." That single word changed everything. Ashcroft's attorney stood abruptly. "Your Honor, we request a recess." Judge Hayes didn't even look up. "Denied." He tried again. "We need time to verify these server logs." Ava calmly answered before the judge could speak. "They've already been verified." She handed another document to the bailiff. "Independent Digital Forensic Laboratory. 3 separate experts. Every file, every timestamp, every login. They all reached the same conclusion." She looked directly at Richard. "The evidence wasn't created. It was altered, and someone forgot that servers remember what people don't." For the first time in his career, Richard Ashcroft had no answer, but Ava wasn't finished. She opened the final compartment of the old leather case. Inside was a small silver flash drive. "This," she said quietly, "contains security footage recovered from the company's archived backup system." Victoria Langford's attorney immediately objected. "We've never seen this evidence." "You were never supposed to," Ava replied. Judge Hayes allowed the video to play. The courtroom screen lit up. It showed a private conference room inside Brooks Infrastructure headquarters nearly 4 months earlier. Richard Ashcroft entered first. Minutes later, Victoria Langford walked in. No audio, just video. Then, another camera angle appeared. This one had sound. Richard's voice echoed through the courtroom. "Ethan won't sell." Victoria answered without hesitation. "Then we make the board believe he has to." Richard asked quietly, "And the daughter?" Victoria smiled. "People always believe money corrupted the poor. Use her. Turn the adoption into the scandal." The courtroom erupted. Employees watching the live broadcast across the country sat frozen. No one expected to hear the conspiracy explained in the conspirators' own voices. Judge Hayes immediately struck her gavel. "Order." When the room finally settled, she looked toward Victoria. "Did you or did you not participate in this meeting?" Victoria remained silent. Her attorney whispered frantically beside her. Judge Hayes asked again. Still no answer. Silence this time sounded like guilt. Ava stepped forward one final time. "For 3 days everyone believed I disappeared." She looked at Ethan. "I didn't disappear. I followed them." She explained how an anonymous employee had contacted her after noticing files being secretly removed from the company's archive. Instead of confronting anyone, she quietly traced backup servers, interviewed former IT administrators, recovered deleted security footage, obtained forensic certifications, and waited until every piece of evidence formed one complete picture. I couldn't come to court with suspicions. I had to come with proof. Ethan looked at her with quiet pride. She hadn't just become a lawyer. She had become exactly the kind of person he had hoped she would be: patient, honest, unshakable. Judge Hayes folded her hands, then delivered the ruling. This court finds substantial evidence that the allegations against Ethan Brooks were manufactured as part of an organized effort to force control of Brooks' infrastructure group. She paused accordingly. The request to suspend Mr. Brooks' voting authority is denied. A wave of relief swept across the courtroom. She continued, "The Founders Protection Charter is recognized as valid. Ms. Ava Brooks is confirmed as its temporary guardian. Richard Ashcroft is removed from all executive authority effective immediately." The court further orders that evidence of fraud, conspiracy, market manipulation, and obstruction be referred to federal prosecutors. The gavel came down, so ordered. Richard Ashcroft slowly lowered his head. Federal agents waiting near the courtroom doors stepped forward. One approached him quietly. "Mr. Ashcroft, we need you to come with us." Across the aisle, Victoria Langford tried to leave. She barely reached the doorway before another pair of agents stopped her. "Ma'am, you are not free to leave." Television cameras outside captured every second. By sunset, every major news network carried the same headline: "Billionaire founder cleared after adopted daughter exposes corporate conspiracy." The following week, Brooks Infrastructure held its first company-wide meeting since the trial. More than 18,000 employees watched from offices, construction sites, warehouses, and project locations across America. Many expected Ethan to celebrate. Instead, he stood on a small platform inside the company's very first warehouse, the same warehouse where everything had begun years earlier. Behind him stood Noah. Beside him stood Ava. Ethan looked across the crowd. "I've spent 15 years hearing people call this my company." He smiled. "They've all been wrong." He pointed toward the mechanics standing near the back, "the people who fix our equipment, the truck drivers, the engineers, the dispatchers, the people who leave home before sunrise and come back long after dark. They built this company. I was just lucky enough to start it." The warehouse erupted into applause. A reporter raised a hand. "Mr. Brooks, after everything that's happened, do you regret adopting Ava?" The room instantly became silent. Ethan smiled, then shook his head. "No. I regret only one thing. I wish I'd found her sooner." Many people in the audience quietly wiped away tears. Months later, life slowly returned to normal. Noah became Chief Operations Officer, not because he was Ethan's son, because he had earned the respect of every employee on the ground. Ava accepted one position: not CEO, not board chair, not executive vice president. She became guardian of the Founders' Charter, ensuring no future board could ever betray the values upon which Brooks Infrastructure had been built. Her office overlooked the same equipment yard where she had once organized invoices as a little girl after school. Sometimes she would stand at the window, watching trucks leave before dawn, remembering where everything started. One crisp autumn morning, Ethan invited Ava to meet him in Lincoln Park, the same park where they had first met 15 years earlier. The old gazebo had been restored. The broken bench was gone. Children laughed nearby. Rain wasn't falling anymore. For a while, neither of them spoke. Finally, Ava reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out a small brass key attached to a faded blue keychain, the very same key Ethan had placed in her hand on the day she became his daughter. "I've carried this every day," she said softly. Ethan smiled. "I wondered if you still had it." She placed it gently into his hand. "You gave me a home. when I had nowhere to belong. She looked toward the city skyline where Brooks' infrastructure towers stood in the distance. Today, I'm giving you something back. The peace of knowing your home will always be protected. Ethan looked at the old key resting in his palm. It wasn't worth anything, not to the world, but to him. It was worth more than every skyscraper his company had ever helped build, more than every contract, more than every dollar. Because it reminded him of something money could never buy. That family isn't built by blood. It's built by the people who choose to stay. He slipped the key into the pocket of the same worn work jacket he had refused to replace for years. Then father and daughter walked through the park together, not as a billionaire, not as the attorney who saved his empire, but simply as a father and the little girl he once refused to leave alone in the rain. And in the end, the greatest thing Ethan Brooks ever built wasn't a billion-dollar company. It was a promise, one he kept, and one that came back to save him when he needed it most.